They gathered up the fragments of our Lord's body into the chalices and the ciboria, and the priests simply walked into the walls of Hagia Sophia to wait until Constantinople was reclaimed for Christ. As I said, that story is not true. It should be. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another segment of Ask Father. I am Father John Lovell, a priest of the Diocese of Rockford and founder of the Coalition for Canceled Priests. We have a question from an Angus Lean. Are Catholics allowed to go to a Masonic funeral? It's a wonderful question, Agnes, because, we might have friends that are not one of our faith. And when it comes to weddings, when it comes to funerals, when it comes to times of great joy that people might be celebrating, or when it comes to times of great sorrow that people have to experience, we might be tempted to say, well, for the good of that person, perhaps I should put aside my faith, my beliefs, and attend, whether it's a wedding or a funeral, outside the Catholic rites in order to show support for that person, in order to show that I care for them. But we have to keep something in mind, and there are different degrees to this, depending on what your friend might be practicing or not practicing. Obviously, I hope it's clear to everyone that under no circumstances can a Catholic ever attend a so-called homosexual marriage. That is always off the table. That is, without a doubt, something that you cannot participate in. But if we look at other instances, what do? We have to realize that two issues need to be dealt with here. First, and more generally, is the matter of Catholics attending non-Catholic religious rites. The next is that of Freemasons specifically. This probably would not even have been a question Catholics would have raised in the past. Tradition is very clear. In a sound text, Moral Theology by Father John McHugh and Father Charles Callahan, Dominicans, basing themselves on St. Thomas Aquinas, we read, "It is unlawful for Catholics in any way to assist actively at or take part in the worship of non-Catholics. Such assistance is intrinsically and gravely evil, for if the worship is non-Catholic in its form, it expresses a belief in the false creed symbolized. Or if the worship is Catholic in form, but is under the auspices of a non-Catholic body, it expresses either faith in a false religious body or a rebellion against the true church. It is unlawful for Catholics to assist passively at non-Catholic worship, unless there are present the conditions requisite for even passive assistance can frequently involve sin." We should also look at Father Francis Connell in his wonderful book, Outlines of Moral Theology. A Catholic would do something gravely wrong if he were to join in the prayers or hymns at a non-Catholic public service, even when there is nothing erroneous expressed in these hymns or prayers. It is wrong to take part actively in such a service because the only religious body authorized by Christ to conduct public services is his one true church. We know that Freemasonry was established specifically in opposition and confrontation to our Lord's church, the one holy Catholic and apostolic church. So we could never attend, just like homosexual marriages, never attend a Masonic rite of anything, whether it's a funeral, if it's a marriage. I don't even know if they do marriages. I am not an expert on Masonry. But we could never participate in such things. But if you notice, I said at the beginning, there are degrees. Let me give you an example of this. And this is a story, and as my church history professor in seminary would say, if it's not true, it should be. It is 1453. Constantinople is about to fall. The story goes that all Eastern Rite that were in schism with Rome and all Latin Rite Catholics gathered for one final liturgy, for one final Mass, before the city was overrun in Hagia Sophia, that great church of Constantinople, to celebrate Mass, to celebrate the liturgy. If I was a Catholic, knowing that the Greeks at the time were in schism, but also knowing there might be a good chance that I am going to die today, being overrun, I do not think I would have a problem participating in a Greek Orthodox liturgy to receive the body and blood of our Lord, because, especially in 1453, there was not really a question of whether or not the Greeks had valid orders. It was certainly an emergency situation. But as the story goes, they all gathered for one final liturgy. Latin Rite priests, Greek priests, and at the conclusion of Mass, in this great church, one of the largest, if not the largest in Christendom, especially at the time, they gathered up the fragments of our Lord's body into the chalices and the ciboria, and the priests simply walked into the walls of Hagia Sophia to wait until Constantinople was reclaimed for Christ. And as tradition goes, at least from the story that I heard, that when Hagia Sophia is reconsecrated to Christ, that those priests, Latin Rite and Eastern, will walk out of the walls and restore Christ to the throne. As I said, that story is not true. It should be. It's a beautiful story to think about on the importance of putting aside differences when it comes to those that have valid orders, certainly in an emergency. Now, would I participate in a Greek Orthodox liturgy if it wasn't an emergency right now? No. But that's why I say there's different degrees on what people believe. I come raised in a mixed marriage myself. My mother was Catholic, and so am I. I'm a cradle Catholic as well as my sister. But my father was Episcopalian. And when I was a child, for example, with my great-grandmother, we would attend her funeral. Would I attend something like that today, now knowing what I know? Probably not. And some might say, oh, but Father, it was your great-grandmother. It was a woman close to you. Yes, it was. But we have to realize that sometimes physical presence in a building or at a place is not necessarily dishonoring somebody if we do not participate in that. Do I pray for my great-grandmother? Of course I do. Do I pray for my Protestant relatives? Of course I do. But do I pray with them? No, I will not do that. Because, as stated earlier, it might be the participation in something evil. Because only our Lord's church has the right to practice the faith publicly. Keep that in mind. It could be jarring. I had a relative about 10 years ago who wanted to get married in a restaurant. She was Catholic. And I refused to go because of that. And I stated my reasons. I sent a letter explaining why it was not a valid marriage. My family was very upset with me at the time. Well, can't you just go in order to support her? No, because it would be giving scandal that in some way I support that attempted union, which would not have been a union at all, because Catholics cannot get married without specific permissions outside of the church, outside of Catholic rites. I would not participate. Come to discover, that relative of mine, shortly thereafter, civilly divorced her supposed husband. He treated her very poorly. And my family kind of looks at me now kind of going, wow, you called that. I didn't call anything, really. I didn't think it was going to turn out the way that it did. I might have had an assumption. But even if they're two wonderful people, if they attempted something like that in a restaurant, how could you do that to one of our Lord's sacraments, marriage, where the couple is supposed to be, at least the Catholic couple, is supposed to be the ministers of that. No, we cannot participate in that. So I always encourage Catholics to remember that. And to remember that, yes, you might get scorn from friends and family for not participating. But to realize that that doesn't mean you shouldn't pray for them. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pray, especially for those that have died outside of the faith. We always should pray, especially at the moment of death, that they might have a conversion. That is so important. Please keep that in mind. I'd also like to quote to you just real quickly from the Code of Canon Law 1917. And while it's not enforced anymore, it still shows us the mind of the Church. It is not licit for the faithful by any manner to assist actively or to have a part in the sacred rites of non-Catholics. Also, passive or merely material presence can be tolerated for the sake of honor or civil office for a grave reason. For example, the reason I gave earlier, Hagia Sophia, approved by the bishop in case of doubt at the funerals, weddings, and similar solemnities of non-Catholics, provided danger of perversion and scandal is absent. I have, on my father's side, cousins that have gotten married. They were never Catholic. And while I probably would not now go to the ceremony, I can understand going and just being a witness as long as you don't participate. As long as you do not participate in the prayers. Keep that in mind, to bear witness to that. I will even have some traditional Catholics who have a serious qualm of conscience about the Novus Ordo say, Father, I really can't sit through or kneel through a Novus Ordo Mass. I know our Lord is being made present. I don't have doubt of that if the priest is doing what the Church commands with the right intention. But I know that it's not the traditional Mass. I know it is not what the Roman Rite should be. And I often given the advice, please, if you want, but still want to be a witness at that marriage, stand in the vestibule. Step inside the church just for the exchanging of vows. Again, this is at a Catholic wedding in a Catholic church. And pray for that couple. And then if you need to, step back out again. That might sound controversial. I might even take some heat for that. And let me make clear, I do believe, if the priest has the right intention, that the Novus Ordo does consecrate the Eucharist, that it is valid. But I also understand why Catholics have serious qualms because they see it as not the Roman Rite, not what was passed down, starting with Peter, through St. Gregory, until the middle of the 20th century. But always pray for the conversion of souls. Always keep that in mind. Loved ones, friends, but you know what? More importantly, for enemies. Always pray for their conversion. Always pray that they will see the light of Christ and come into his church. May God continue to bless you. Once again, I am Father John Lovell. Until next time.